to the all-new 3pm podcast on mirrorfootball.co.uk. My name is Steve Anglesey. I'm joined today by the site's editor Dan Silver, and in a minute I'll be joined by the rock photographer Kevin Cummins. But first, let's talk about the sound that's been a sensation this summer in the Mirror Football offices. It is not the vuvuzela. It is this noise, which we heard on Sky Sports News when Sir Alex Ferguson was interviewed at the races. We suspect he may have been drinking.
Oh, well, of course, yeah, it is a different life.
Sensational stuff. I'm joined now by the clearly shaken Dan Silver and by Kevin Cummins, a rock photographer of many years standing who's photographed some of the greatest names in music: Joy Division, the Stone Roses, the Smiths, Oasis, The Fall, and not Half Man, Half Biscuit among them.
Hello.
Kevin, I guess we'll be showing some of these pictures of yours up on slides with the YouTube of this, with obviously a huge payment to yourself involved. I guess that people who know music photography, music photography would recognise many of Kevin's pictures. He was the photographer for the NME for many years, and his most famous works include, well, what would you say, the Stone Roses covered in paint?
Ian Curtis.
Ian Curtis having a fag.
Snowbound Bridge.
Snowbound Bridge, yeah.
Sean Ryder on the huge letter E.
Yes.
And a few non-Mancunians as well.
Correct, yeah.
Courtney Love. Various odd bots.
Now, did you do the Soup Dragons?
Not really on our radar. That was sounds, really.
That must be a terrible thing for your royalties down the years, mustn't it? The
But
lack of Soup Dragons and Jesus Jones.
And missing out on those payments. I think, yeah, it's probably sold about 2 every 5 or 6 years, I think. Did you like Joe Boxers as well?
A little bit before my time, I'd like to add.
They were doing the Boxer beat, as we all know.
It was the T-shirt you were wearing, that's all.
That's always good on the podcast. We'll start. I guess we'll start with inevitably with the new season. As a Manchester City fan, this is not a position that you or I are used to finding ourselves in. Do you think that world domination beckons, or do you think that it will be defeat snatched from the jaws of victory once again?
No, I mean, I can really start a conversation with. I was talking to City's chairman recently, but as it happens, I was when I was in New York, or Gary Cook, and he was saying that he wants to get rid of this idea that City are underachievers and this policy, this almost policy defeat that the people within the club have. So we sent a questionnaire around to everybody and asked them what they thought would constitute a successful season, and people within the club were saying things like beating Man United twice, finishing fourth from bottom, and stuff. And he said to me, "So what do you think?" And Vicky Kloss, who's head of communication, said, "Well, I know what Kevin will think because he's a City fan." And I said, "We'll win the league." And she said, "You don't think that?" I said, "I do think that." I said, "Why wouldn't I think that?" I said, "Manchester United haven't improved their squad. They've bought 2 third-tier players who the press are desperately trying to dig up. Some Fulham player who is fairly average, and this Mexican kid who fell over the ball and it hit his head and went in. You know,
he gets an assist for that as well as the goal, though. That is the good
good
thing.
In Hernandez's defence, I think he did slightly more than that at the World Cup. He does look a bit of a prospect.
But so did Vice. Vice looked great in the World Cup, and we've sent him out on loan. But playing in the World Cup's completely different to playing in the Premier League.
No, granted, but I think Hernandez had a better World Cup than Vice.
Well, let's see what we think
yes,
at Christmas when he's scored 2 goals and he's been on the bench most of the time.
I'm quite excited about. Have you seen their new signing that they made last night? Which is they've got a guy called Baby or Bebe. I don't know how you pronounce his name.
Is it Babe?
Or is it just Babe?
It's good for headline writers, I think.
It's a dream for us.
Yeah.
He's obviously no one's going to put him in the corner, as Dan has pointed out. So there'll be no set pieces there. But it's a dream. But again, he is one of those kind of. He's another one for the future, even at 7 million. He's another of those second-tier players.
That's the thing with Man United at the moment. I think they're on a bit of a downward spiral. And last season, the most exciting thing that happened to them was beating us, and normally it's the other way around. So they were quite happy to win the League Cup, and a couple of years ago that wouldn't have been any success at all for them. And then Chelsea, again, Chelsea can't even get a squad of 25s together by all accounts without drafting in some of the youth team. Arsenal have been trying to play the last 2 or 3 seasons without a goalkeeper and without a holding midfield player, and Wenger seems to want to try and do the same again unless we lend them a keeper to try and even things up a bit. And
We could leave Chelsea a few for their 25 as well.
Yeah.
There's plenty of players at Man City. Do you think that is going to affect the team this season? There's just too many good players who are going to be affected by not playing week in, week out.
I think it depends really, because I think if we have a good Europa Cup run, that's 19 games, isn't it, more or less? So you've got to virtually have a squad for that. And I think what City have tried to do, they've tried to get 2 players for each position, which obviously doesn't keep the second player happy. And if you're, you know yourself, if you're sitting there, you're Wayne Bridge, for instance, and suddenly City buy a great left back, you know you're not going to play that many games at left back. So it's quite hard. I suppose 90 grand a week softens the blow a bit. I don't know. Players like to play, don't they? They do. They like the money, obviously, but they want to play.
Like to. I mean, in Wayne Bridge's case, it might be worthwhile him spending a bit more time at home anyway. It's almost a shame he had to play at the start of last season. So that's so we've written off Arsenal, Chelsea. Dan? Do you see any obstacles in the way to Manchester City's world domination?
Yeah, I think the rest of the league. I've not been from Manchester or supporting Man City. I kind of have a different take on it, I guess. I think you will struggle to get that cohesion early in the season. I think the first team you'll have will be as good as anybody else's in the league, but I think it will take time. And I think you will lose too much ground early on to make up. I mean, I've got you down as coming second, and I think if it...
Who's top?
Man United.
How can they finish top?
Well, they were only 1 point off last season, weren't they? And they were useless, you know. So, and
I'll tell you what Man United. The only thing I respect them for is their resilience and the way they keep going and going to the end. You never know they're beaten, but that's similar with other clubs throughout the league. Blackpool are like that. Man United are like Blackpool. They just don't give up. They think they never ever believe they've lost a game. And that's how they did it. They did us 3 times in the last 30 seconds. Yeah. I mean, the last 30 seconds of some kind of imaginary time the referee had in his head.
So I support West Ham, and sadly they've won that game within the first 10 minutes rather than the last 10 minutes. But I think Fergie, this being his last, could be his last season. I think
let's hope so.
Determined.
I'd let him win it if I thought that was going to happen.
I think he'd be determined to go out with a win, and I think that would push him harder. And I think that the spectre of Martin O'Neill lurking in the background as well, I think it would totally galvanise him, and I think he's going to get the very best out of what is still a decent squad with a couple of good youngsters that may or may not become good.
I think he gets 80% players to play at 100% Ferguson. I don't think it's that good a squad. You know, Darren Ferguson looks like the kind of bloke who... Darren Fletcher, sorry. Oh yeah, we better not talk about Darren Ferguson, or else Ferguson won't speak to you. Darren Fletcher looks like the sort of guy who stands outside Wetherspoons in Balham smoking a fag on the end of a pin. You know. and he's an athlete, yeah, so you can smoke it right down to the very end, like Marquis Smith does.
Now, talking of, the name's been mentioned there. Let's talk about some of the musicians then that you've encountered in your long and illustrious career in music photography. Now, I guess the sort of the guy that you don't associate with being a football fan, who really, I guess as you were coming up, they were coming up as well, is Ian Curtis of Joy Division. Now, you told me on several occasions that he was a Manchester City fan. Did he used to go to Main Road?
Yeah, he actually wanted to buy a house near Main Road so he could live near the ground.
So he could...
Stunned silence from everyone.
It is quite stunning, because obviously you don't... The guy who wrote these elaborate lyrics and sort of sung like Frank Sinatra, You don't. It's not normally associated with
to be
being
fair,
the king of the kit packs. And
being a City fan, you're in a dark place, aren't you?
well, I think you had to say
Yeah,
that. Rather
that was
rather
the joke I was biting back, to be honest.
Well, Ian was the only one interested in football.
Yeah.
Bernard and Peter Hook, who are obviously these days lifelong Manchester United fans, have no interest in football at all. Even as far as when they made World in Motion in 1990, they had to get Keith Allen in to write the lyrics, because Bernard said to me, "No fuck all about football." He said, "I just write bang the ball in the back of the onion bag, governor." He said, "I had no idea what any of the terminology was."
I think didn't they have a song like that was on one of their later albums? I think that was one of the highlights of their later albums.
Yeah.
So he was quite keen, and in between he'd come in and read the someone take these dreams away, and then he'd go, "Hey Kev, what do you reckon? Should Paul Power start on Saturday?"
That kind of thing.
That kind of thing. I can see it. It's an interesting.
And because of that, his daughter's a City fan.
She is indeed a City fan, yeah.
And when I did the book with Man City, she helped me quite a bit with that. Well, she ran around after me picking all my photographic litter up. So I tend to leave lenses in a trail behind me.
We've got to mention Kevin's book here because I think it is, all friendship aside, it really is a sort of a classic football book, and it's called We're Not Really Here. I'm not sure it's available anymore just because it's sold out. But it was a photographic diary of Manchester City's last season at Main Road, and it's really worth looking at if you can get your hands on a copy.
Redefine football photography.
Going back to Ian Curtis, if I can for a moment, how does it make you feel when you hear Man United fans singing "Geeks Will Tear You Apart"?
I've never heard that. Is that what they sing?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
No, I can never hear that, fans. I've been to Old Trafford. I go to Old Trafford once a year, or if we draw them in the cup, twice. I've never heard that. But they do tend to sing about City a lot.
This is very true.
All you hear their fans singing at European matches is anti-City songs. So they're not bothered about us, obviously.
No, not worried in the slightest. You're also a great friend of Tony Wilson, who I think died 3 years ago this week. He was a rabid Manchester United fan. Was he a rabid Manchester United fan when you first met him?
No, he wasn't really interested in football at school. And even when he came out, he only got into football a bit later, although he did tell tales of people on the Stretford end calling him Bruce because he was so into Bruce Springsteen. But to be fair, I think no, he wasn't a footballer. Not, they all were. It became a glory game. Don't forget that when we were growing up, certainly through the 70s and 80s, you told people you were into football, you were a pariah. Everyone, I talked to when I first moved down to London in '87, and I'd say, you start talking about football or winning or music, whatever you talk to people about, and people would just look at you and say you were weird if you were into football because it was such a gutter sport then. It wasn't glamorous. But since the reinvention of the game and since Italia '90, everybody has to have a team, even though all they do is shout at the telly in the pub. They still have to have a team. They don't know anything about them. They don't know that there was a history before the Premier League, a lot of people. And maybe that doesn't matter anymore. But most people got into football. Italia '90 was the rebirth, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was. I mean, I vividly remember the Friday night that Arsenal won the league at Anfield and watching it in a pub very near Main Road and being the only person in the pub watching it on television. Well, and people saying, "Can we go now?" Because I think we were going on to the Hacienda. "Can we leave now?" Oh, hang on, Michael Thomas has just got the ball.
This one might end as well.
Yeah. So yes, I think that is very true. So yes, obviously Bernard Sumner, United fan, as we know now. Peter Hook. Ian Brown is somebody that you've worked with a lot and has been a friend of yours. He is a huge Manchester United fan. Terry Hall's a friend of yours as well.
Terry Hall was always into football because he was a Man United fan from Coventry, so I suppose that he was allowed to support Man United coming from there. He when I first photographed him for the NME, when he was with, it might have been Colourfield, he told me he wanted to be photographed at Old Trafford, because obviously knowing I was a City fan, he thought that would wind me up. So we asked Man United if we could do the pictures. And I went to Old Trafford to photograph him, and I photographed him standing up when all the fences were up in the old scoreboard end. And I stood him in position. I said, "You're now standing exactly where I was stood when Dennis Law put you in the second division." So I think he quite liked that, the banter really, and I did these pictures of him, and then I worked with him for quite a few years afterwards. And they once arranged a 6-day tour around, because their manager was a City fan as well. And they did this tour that followed City and United's fixtures, so none of us would miss any of them, which was quite sweet of him. And that meant a real slog for him one day, because they did a gig up in Scotland, and the next night was in Norwich, so that we could go and see Man United play Norwich.
Does this ever cause conflict with celebrity Manchester United fans? Because obviously, listeners may have picked this up, that you're not that keen on Manchester United.
Well, to be fair, celebrity Man United fans, what Mick Hucknall, Eamon Holmes, people like, I don't photograph people like that.
Well, Ian Brown, you photographed.
I photographed Ian, he doesn't mind. When I photographed the Stone Roses covered in paint, I painted them in sky blue and white. So I've got the last say, really, I think.
When did you first encounter Oasis?
First time I saw Oasis, and the record company took me to see a small gig they were playing in Amsterdam to see if we'd get on. And I got there, we flew there, the band had travelled on the ferry overnight, and we got there, and the only person in the hotel was Noel. And I said, "When are the rest of them? Are they all in bed?" And he said, "They've all been deported." And I thought, brilliant. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, they had a fight with some Chelsea fans on the ferry, and when they got there, they wouldn't let them off, and they sent them all back home. So we just had the afternoon in Amsterdam. Took a few pictures of him standing forlornly by the poster for the gig, just to prove that I'd actually been there, and then came back. And then I did some pictures of them wearing Man City shirts for the enemy, because City at the time was sponsored by Brother, so it was an easy link, you know.
It's
good
stuff, this, isn't it?
And then the editor refused to put those pictures on the cover because he wanted them to look cool, and he said, "I don't want them to be associated with losers." So it was a bit disappointing, really. But those pictures obviously have been used again and again, and then interestingly, it's 20 years old. There's some anniversaries the enemy had at the start of this year, and they put that picture on the cover. So it got there in the end.
In the end, yeah. And I mean, Noel Gallagher seems fairly knowledgeable about football. You've had your moments with Noel Gallagher as well, haven't you, Dan?
No.
I was thinking of
You've invited the wrong dancer.
Yeah. But I do. He does seem to have a fantastic way with just cutting through all the issues on football. I mean, some of his comments in the World Cup, I think, were the most prescient comments I've read anywhere on England. I think his damning indictment or assessment of the England team is that it's very good to look world class against Wigan every week, but when you come up against Germany, you get found out. And I don't think I read any journalist that put it better than that. He's
sharp. He's very sharp, isn't he, Noel? He's very good at one-liners, and he doesn't care what he says, which is always a great attribute.
But there's nothing kind of false about them. They are kind of.
No, when he watches the game, he goes to the game and happens to match with him, and he's really into it. And he doesn't just take sponsors' tickets. He's quite happy to go along on his own as well.
I mean, I'm quite pally with his friend Russell Brand, who I think is from the other end of the spectrum, where lifelong West Ham fan with possibly about 10 or 15 years away from the game, between being a teenager and now being a celebrity fan.
And being given corporate tickets.
Absolutely, and the contrast between the two, I think, is quite marked, even though they get on very well and they kind of gel when they're talking about it.
Well, it's difficult for Noel, because obviously if he goes to a game, he'll get cornered by 3,000 City fans all wanting to sign their beer mug or whatever. and so he likes to go. He'd love to go and sit amongst everybody at away games, like at Spurs. But if he goes, he just knows he's going to get a load of grief all day. So I guess it's easier to go in a box, really.
Well, Russell loves that. He kind of walks up and down preening.
He can afford to go in a box, can't he?
I did think You're Just a Shit Chaz and Dave was very good. That was the Spurs fans, wasn't it? A couple of seasons ago when his him and his brother were there. His brother, have you had any in-depth football conversations with him? Have you had any in-depth conversations with him about anything?
Well, I had quite an in-depth conversation with him once about Joy Division, oddly, because I was sat in the pub near where they were recording, near Old Street.
Did you say they weren't as good as the Beatles?
What he said was, he looked through them and he was looking through all these pictures and he said, "Why have we never been photographed like this?" And I said, "Because you're not bleak. You're not. It's a completely different mood. It's a different drug thing. It's a different everything. There's no reason why Oasis should be photographed like Joy Division." But I kind of almost got what he was saying, which was, at the time they're just being photographed as laddos, and I think he wanted to be taken more seriously and have all these sort of slightly portentous portraits and so on. So I don't know. The Beatles is always a mystery to me. I can't believe that 4 people from Liverpool, not one of them, didn't like football. It's quite disappointing, isn't it, in a way?
But it goes back to what you were saying, Kevin, about that different era when, Liverpool was still a hotbed of football at that time, but it just wasn't the social thing.
It wasn't the thing to be seen at, was it? It was very working class, and music's very working class. There wasn't a massive crossover at the time.
Yeah, whereas now it's
all one.
It's everybody, isn't it?
It's some amorphous mass, isn't it?
It is. Who is the sort of the most rabid of the City fans that you've interviewed? You've photographed. I would guess, somebody like Mike Pickering or Billy Duffy.
Yeah, Billy Duffy is.
Billy Duffy from The Cult, for those who are unfamiliar with his...
99% of our listening audience.
Billy Duffy is the guy who did the riff for She Sells Sanctuary, and frankly, that's all you know and all you need to know about Billy Duffy.
Billy is... I mean, he's lived in LA. He's got a place here as well. But when he was living in LA, he'd have the football pink flown over every week.
On its own seat.
That's right. In its own plane.
Yeah, on a Learjet. So his brother would post it to him in time-honoured fashion, and so he'd get the football pink, and he'd sit there on Melrose,
wishing he was in my side.
Yeah, down the Moss, sipping one of the choice of 72 mineral waters that was on sale at the bar. So Billy would have the football pink flown over, and I once photographed him on stage in Texas, wearing, for the encore, a shot he wanted. He came on in a City away shirt, leather trousers, and a Gibson. So, a great combination. Tell me a Man United shirt would have looked good in that.
What did Ian Asprey make of that? Or was he off being the busy child of a wolf and a motorcycle in the corner?
There is, but Ian's a Tranmere, Everton and Rangers fan. So, he's very mixed up. But
Tranmere for the glory, obviously.
Yeah. Trying to outdo half man, half biscuit on the Tranmere stakes.
Of course, the Manic Street Preacher's in it for the glory as well. Nicky Wire is an enormous football fan, is he not?
He's a Tottenham fan.
He is a Tottenham fan. He loves them for the glamour.
James likes Nottingham Forest.
Yes, he does. And Sean likes playing with his iPod.
Yeah, he likes techie stuff, really, doesn't he?
Do we think Richie was much of a football fan, or is much of a football fan?
He was actually probably a City fan.
It's back to the Curtis. Yes, very possibly, very possibly. Who else do we want to talk about? We want to talk about Mike Pickering, of course, who's a long-time friend of yours. Mike Pickering was, we can forgive him for this, the leader of M People.
I don't think we can forgive him.
Well, he was the DJ at the Hassy Ender for many years, and an all-round good fellow. He was in Quango,
Which, of course, and T-Coy.
Oh yeah.
Carino, Decoy is a big
It's a
dance
great-
floor hit again
great
at the
record.
moment. Although Mike says, even though everybody's playing it all summer, they've sold 8 further copies out there. So he wonders how the DJs have all got to it.
But he was certainly somebody. I remember him talking about going to sleep in a hotel, listening to a game on Team Talk over in a hotel in America.
Yeah, Mike is, I mean, again, Mike's a proper fan. He goes to the games, comes to all the away games, certainly goes to all the London games as well, and tries to get up to Manchester as often as possible. And we used to go to games together when I lived in Manchester. We went to Hull once for a full members' cup tie midweek, and we stopped on the outskirts of Hull and asked them if they could tell us where the football ground was, and they sent us to Hull Kingston Rovers, and we had no idea they called it football. Eventually, we found Boothbury Park. And they made us take, this is mid-80s, they made us take our laces out of our shoes before we went in.
Was that in
case
case
you
you
Yeah, hanged ourselves.
Curtis again.
So we had to take our laces out. And Mike had a thing about Mick McCarthy at the time. He wasn't Mick McCarthy's biggest fan. And he shouted out, a second the ball was kicked off and it was played back to Mick McCarthy. And McCarthy looked up and he just knew what he was going to do. Hoof it off the pitch, and Mike just shouted out, "You f***ing donkey, McCarthy." And it echoed around this empty ground, so there's about 400 people in the ground. And just McCarthy looked up to him and Mike went and shook his fist at him. And a few months earlier, the reason all this started was a few months earlier we'd been to Blackpool, and we were stood outside the ground as the team coach arrived. And McCarthy got off, and there was about 6 City fans standing there, not very interested, no one asking them for autographs or anything. And McCarthy came over to me, Pickering, and Rob Gretton, who was New Orders manager, and said, "I hope you lads have been behaving yourself." And Mike said, "Why, who are you, the old Bill?" McCarthy said, "I'm just telling you, you know," and Mike said, "Just get on with playing the game, will you?" Said, "We'll do what we want."
Now, if you've read Stuart McConey's book Cider with Roadies, there are numerous stories of Kevin in there, some of which you dispute hotly. Can you talk the listeners through your tour of America was it with Public Enemy, and there was some trouble about you getting home?
That's got nothing to do with City though, has that?
Has it not?
No, I think I've not read Stuart's book, although I have looked at the bits in it where he talks about me and things that were going on, but I think he's kind of put all his stories together to make it into one book, quite rightly. I mean, you know, it's part work, part fiction, part fact. I assume you're talking about United Airlines.
I am talking about United Airlines.
Right, well what happened was, we in the 80s, record companies had a lot of money, and it wasn't just for flowers and champagne. They'd just throw money at you to review their bands anywhere in the world and go off for 5 days, and the bands thought the enemy had so much money, where we'd say, well actually you're paying for it. They had no idea.
It's amazing the industry's gone to hell.
I know.
Who would have seen it coming?
Unbelievable, really, isn't it? Sell no records and spend all that money. Well, they don't pay us anymore, so when they want a sleeve, they plead poverty and say, but we're only pressing 6,000. They're trying to pay you less than they were paying for it when you shot it about 20 years ago. So I was offered a job in San Francisco, but they wanted to cut the price down a bit. So rather than fly direct to San Francisco with a well-known airline, they tried to get us to go on United. And it was 3 legs. It was fly to somewhere ludicrous like Atlanta, then up to Chicago, then on to San Francisco to interview Cud. And then come back the same way. So there was more time in the air than actually in San Francisco, and I just said that didn't really make any sense.
You see, I too shared a past with Kevin. I worked on The Enemy for many years, and as a young music journalist coming up, this story was passed down by PRs as legend that Kevin Cummins would not fly on United Airlines because he was a Man City fan. It's absolutely
I know
passed
everybody
into,
thinks it's the one
into
thing.
solid
If you ask,
gold.
and if you ask people in the music industry, what's the one thing you know about him? They'll tell you the United Airlines story, and they think, you know, fair play to you or whatever. But it wasn't true, and it was only because I wouldn't go on that trip because I didn't see the point of it. Anyway, so one day we shared a floor with the now sadly defunct 90 Minutes magazine, which was quite a nice little football mag at the time. And one afternoon, there was a piece in the back of it called My Sad Mate. And they sat around, they started making a few things up about me, and a few things were true, and they put this United Airlines, won't fly United Airlines, blah, blah, blah. And this, when I went to the pub on Saturday, after this magazine had come out, before a City game, this bloke came up to me and he said, "Saw that thing about you in the magazine, mate." He said, "Brilliant." He said, "Didn't even know those cunts had their own airline." So anyway, so it's the United Airlines story is the one thing people believe that actually isn't true. Some of the other things might be true, but that isn't true.
Okay, so to sum up, I do want to talk about Marquis Smith a little bit because he's my favourite of all the City supporting musicians. But to sum up, Dan, you've interviewed footballers, you've interviewed musicians. Who are the best people to interview?
Well, I know the better people are to hang out with afterwards.
It's not footballers, is it?
No. I mean, well, you say that. I mean, musicians are kind of going the same way. Footballers have been so media trained to within an inch of their life now that it's trying to get something interesting out of them. And you know this is why it's like getting blood out of the stone. And the minute you do get something interesting out of them, the PR kiboshes it anyway. Whereas musicians back in the day, and I'm sure Kevin about this, were much more circumspect and you know would do anything and talk about anything. But the way the music industry has gone is going the same way that the football industry is. It's not so much sponsor control, but the record companies are so determined to crack down on their artist's image that once you get above a certain level, the bands just change almost overnight. And
Well, the whole thing's changed. The whole thing's changed a lot. I mean, you know, people say there are no great rock and roll images anymore. But it's because you can't get the kind of access we used to get. If we wanted to go with Happy Mondays around the world almost, we could. If they were going to Brazil, we'd say, we want to go to Brazil next week, and off we'd go. And they wouldn't be kept in a separate hotel, and you were allowed 10 minutes access to them each day. You could just stay with them. We'd all stay together as one group, so you could do anything you liked, really. And interestingly, football was a little bit like that, I think, because I've been on a lot of City pre-season tours. That was for my holiday. And in the old days, you'd go, you know, this is only like early 90s, you'd go and they'd go to the bar afterwards and all hang out, and there'd be lots of stories, and the players would be quite happy to mix with the fans and so on. But now they're kept increasingly apart. And I think what City did this time in New York was great, because even though it was really a promotion for Umbro for the away kit, they arranged a pickup game in the Bowery, and two teams played, which one was a team Umbro's PR company had put together, and the other one was a supporters club team. They played, and then City turned up in a minibus and got out and played against them. And it was great, and the players loved it.
Who was better?
Both were diplomatic 1-1 draws.
That's great, yeah, very
But
good.
the players actually loved playing, and they played against both teams. And afterwards, I was chatting to a couple of them, and they were saying, we could stay out here all afternoon, it's brilliant. Because they were off the leash, and they were doing what they wanted to do, which was actually kick a ball around, almost in the street. Yeah. So it was fantastic, it was great. It was a great piece of PR as well.
Not something that City have always been associated
very good
with.
at it at the moment.
Yeah, but they have become very good at it.
Doing, you know, the other thing they did, there were 3 teams out there, well, 4 if you count Portsmouth, but people didn't even know they were there. In fact, Portsmouth's, I don't even think the backroom staff knew Portsmouth were there, because their kit went missing. But Portsmouth were there, Man United were there, Tottenham were there, and we were there. And the only one with any presence in the American press was City, because we gave a rooftop pitch to a school in Harlem, and City are looking after it for them and keeping the whole thing going, and got a coach there. And the head teacher, when he was thanking them was crying at the podium. It was incredible. And they're just, and I know it's easy to say, well, you can afford to do it, but lots of people can afford to do stuff and don't bother doing it. And Man United were there and had no presence at all. And the other brilliant thing, of course, City did was when Mancini was asked about Landon Donovan, he said, of course he's a good player, and so he's not interested in signing him. But mentioning an American player got us in every newspaper coast to coast.
Yeah.
So smart, really smart,
yeah.
and very different from what it used to be like.
I mean, you've photographed footballers as well as musicians. Who has stood out for you? Obviously, Ron Atkinson did not stand out for you.
No,
Ron, the great Kevin Cummins story, which I've just remembered. It's a great story.
I went to photograph Ron Atkinson for the Face, and he was there with his...
What year was this?
Mid-80s again. And he was there with his sidekick, Mick Brown, I think it was. And we gave him a copy of The Face, and he's looking through it, and there's a big piece about Tom Waits. And he's looking, and he said to his mate, he said, Tom Waits, he said, didn't he win that talent competition in Puerto Banús the other week? I have no idea. The Face was a different world to it.
If I knew that was true, I'd hate to see he came second.
And we deliberately hadn't taken the issue that had Michael Clark wearing a dildo in it, because we thought he might not want to be in the same magazine.
Casual racism, fine. No.
Yeah. So, anyway, Ron, I was doing the pictures of Ron, and he said, and in the end, I said to him, look, I'm going outside, and he said, well, how long is this going to take? And I said, well, probably about 30 minutes or so. And he said, 30 minutes? He said, you could reshoot Ben-Hur in 30 minutes. He said, you've got 30 seconds.
Let's close by talking about the great Marquis Smith. Have you ever talked football with the lead singer of The Fall?
Yeah, because obviously he has a similar attitude to Man United as I have.
Pathological hatred.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to feel a bit sorry for them now.
You're making me stand up for them, and that's a position I thought I'd never be in. I feel soiled and violated.
So Mark, I don't think anything I could possibly say that Mark E. Smith would say about Man United would be broadcastable. Honestly, I really don't. Most of it is so offensive, and the names he's got for the fans, which I didn't even understand, and I had to go and look it up. But City, he does like City, but his idea of City is still a bit Colin Bell and
Summerby, isn't it?
Summerby era. He's quite pleased, obviously, that we're doing well, and oddly, when we had the kit launch up at City a couple of weeks ago, Marquis Smith was one of the invited guests, rather bizarrely.
And did he attend?
He did, yeah, he was there.
Did he go away with his shirt under his arm?
Well, I'd like to have seen him try it on. He's not exactly cut an athletic figure, does he?
Are there many Fall fans in the squad at the moment?
No, the only Fall fan I know in sport is David Lloyd. He's a massive fan of Fall.
Yes, he is. But he prefers the mid-80s period, doesn't he?
And he likes half man, half biscuit.
Yes, yeah. I don't think there's many. I think Pat Nevin is probably the only sportsman who's going to be into the Fall.
Do you have many conversations with the players about music? Is there much common ground there, or is it just a subject not worth going to?
No. When I was working at City doing the book with them that season, there was very little interest in music apart from the usual R&B and a bit of possibly Linkin Park or something like that.
It'd be Kasabian now.
Yeah, it'd be Kasabian, and the Killers. I think the Killers, a lot of players like the Killers for some reason. But no, they're not really that interested. There was only Stuart Pearce, and Stuart Pearce just likes the Sex Pistols and the Stranglers. Yeah, but he was really impressed that I photographed both of them. And in time-honoured fashion, as a footballer, he said, "Can you give me some photographs of them now?" Because he can't afford one.
I think the good thing about the tape we played of Alex Ferguson at the top of the show, he actually sounds like Marquis Smith is singing now. So that's a kind of a nice way to bring it round and wrap it up. Thank you very much to Kevin Cummins for being here. Let's go out once again with Sir Alex Ferguson at the races.
Oh, well, of course. Yeah, it is a different life.
Thanks to Dan Silver and to Kevin Cummins, to all of you for listening. We'll be back here next week on mirrorfootball.co.uk with another 3 p.m. podcast. Don't forget to check out my 3 p.m. column in the Daily Mirror on Monday and also on mirrorfootball.co.uk. See you next week.